So, the US is considering leaving NATO. Well, these are not my words. Here you can see US Senator Mike Lee's post where he reacted to a Norwegian company. So, let me explain in simple words what is happening in Norway and whether the US could really leave NATO. Now, as you guys know, recently Zelensky and Trump met in the White House, and their meeting went crazy. Nobody expected that Trump and JD Vance would go this aggressive against Zelensky. Now, you can argue that it was all Zelensky's fault. He disrespected the US, provoked Trump, cursed JD Vance, and everything, but the honest reality is that limits were crossed from both sides. The world media has never been in favor of the Trump administration, and after that meeting, it gave them another reason to tarnish Trump's image. Trump's administration's softness toward Russia and ultra-aggression toward their allies is already a hot topic of discussion. But after Trump and Zelensky explosive meeting, Europeans now understand one thing: Trump is not going to listen, and the US is not the same country that used to give a la-la land vibe. The US under Donald Trump is a completely different country that will only focus on itself, and most importantly, work to reduce the trillions of dollars of debt it is carrying on its shoulders. Now, what happened is that due to the Trump-Zelensky explosive meeting, a Norwegian fuel company, Haltback Bunkers, got so hurt that it has announced it will cease supplying fuel to US military forces in Norway and American ships docking in Norwegian ports. Can you imagine how big of a development this is? Haltback Bunkers provided US warships with 3 million liters of fuel in 2024, and now they are severing all ties over Ukraine. The owner of Haltback Bunkers said, "We have a moral compass. We support Ukraine. We have many Ukrainian employees, and we know how terribly this war affects them and their families." Now, here is exactly the post from Haltback Bunkers. You can see that they are using very strong language, and showing their anger toward Trump and JD Vance, claiming how dare they scold Zelensky in front of world media. The USA put on a backstabbing TV show, while Zelensky showed restraint. You can pause and read this cryptic post. But at the end, they wrote, "No fuel to Americans." They encourage all Norwegians and Europeans to follow their example. Now, this is really bad news for the USA. Well, time will tell whether all European companies will really boycott the US or not. But this kind of action by a single European company can give a moral boost to several other European companies. And honestly, the kind of circumstances and tension being created between the US and Europe, there are chances that more and more European countries will really start boycotting US companies and anything related to the US. And if this happens, it will be a huge setback for the US. Now, this is not the only thing happening in Europe. European leaders are altogether demanding a new world leader, and several meetings are being conducted to support Ukraine with billions of euros and military equipment. Even after leaving the USA, Zelensky directly landed in the UK and met with Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The UK has already announced that they will provide Ukraine with £4.5 billion in military aid in 2025, which is roughly around $5.7 billion. Additionally, Zelensky and Starmer signed a £2.26 billion loan for Ukrainian military supplies, which will be repaid using profits from frozen Russian assets, and Zelensky is also scheduled to meet with King Charles. I mean, a lot of things are going on in Europe, which is their personal matter, but in the end, they are always dragging the USA into helping them. Even after giving hundreds of billions of dollars, providing military supplies, offering intelligence support, and allowing the use of F-16s, Europe's behavior toward blaming the USA is becoming a never-ending story. Now, looking at these developments and European leaders' hatred toward the US, Senator Mike Lee posted that Europe doesn't love us, so let's leave NATO. Here you can see his post. And, as usual, Elon Musk also wants the same, because the reason is simple: the US is burning a hole in its pocket. Here you see this data showing that the USA is backing 2/3 of the NATO budget. Although many can argue that it is the US defense budget, and the US only pays 16% of the NATO budget, but if you look at the broader perspective, all US defense spending is itself helping NATO by making the US military the strongest in the world, or indirectly and even directly contributing to NATO, which is why NATO is the strongest defense alliance in the world. From north to south to east to west, the US military is literally defending Europe. They have deployments in the Black Sea, the Arctic Ocean, and multiple military bases all over Europe, and only the US spends a significant amount of money to maintain their military for any instant action. Now, Donald Trump's relationship with NATO has always been a tough ride. Multiple times he accused European leaders of not spending 2% of their GDP for NATO, but European leaders brush off this topic with laughter because they honestly never feel the need. In the past also, Trump hinted that he might pull the US out of NATO, because he feels that the US has no danger from Russia. Russia is Europe's problem, so why is the United States unnecessarily involved, spending hundreds of billions of dollars? Now, that was the issue. European countries struggle to even spend 2% of their GDP, and now recently, Donald Trump is saying that the 2% criteria is outdated. We need a 5% contribution from each country to run NATO, which really gave European leaders a mini heart attack. They cry to give 2%, how can they give 5% of their GDP to NATO? Also, the recent 25% tariff announcement by Donald Trump on the European Union just gave European countries another reason to hate Trump. Now, on one side, it seems like everything is happening right, but on the other side, the situation is becoming uglier. Europe now understands that relying on the US is not an option anymore, and the US may never come to Europe's defense, even if it stays in NATO. So, Europe will eventually increase their defense budgets, and by the end of Trump's presidency, you will see a different, divided world where almost the entire Western civilization will turn against the US. Even Canada, Japan, and Australia will be seen standing against the US. All of Europe will turn into something else. They will no longer be the garden of the world. A lot of immigration will happen in order to recruit people into the military. All priorities will change, and the most important thing for Europe will be military strength. European leaders are also considering a dangerous move of sharing nuclear weapons, as Russia did with Belarus. Right now, only 2 European countries have nuclear weapons, the UK and France. The whole of Europe is working to make a European nuclear deterrent, which will be led by France. Under this, France will share its nuclear weapons with other European countries. Britain might also do the same, but they are not part of the European Union. So, in the future, you will hear the term, nuclear sharing, a lot of times. Also, European leaders like Starmer and Macron are having discussions and publicly saying that they are ready to send their troops to Ukraine to fight against Russia. This is again a very controversial step because it will be very bad for Europe. There are even reports that this move will give Europe a reason to activate Article 5 and force the US to directly join the war, which will ultimately lead to World War III, as Donald Trump warned Zelensky in the meeting. Now, if I come to the US removal from NATO, then there are very high chances that this might happen. The Donald Trump administration may eventually pull the US out of NATO, but this process will be very complex and difficult. Even some Republicans may rebel against Donald Trump for this highly risky move. But if it is already decided, then it will eventually happen. And if this happens, then the world will witness a new world order, where the US and Russia will be on the same side against Europeans. And, to be very honest, this already seems to be happening. Both countries are even talking about cutting their defense budgets by 50%, which is really crazy. Another thing that might happen is that the US will not pull out from NATO, but it will lower its participation in the group so much that it will be virtually non-existent. At last, the upcoming 4 years will really be a test for Europe and their supporters, and it will be interesting to see how they tackle both the US and Russia. So, what do you think about the US possibilities of withdrawal from NATO? Do you think this will happen or not? Thanks for watching the video, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.